thought we would get things going here in a screen recording of my laptop. I would take you through how to start a project in GarageBand and set that up. And then we're going to turn our attention to how the piece of music that I created yesterday came together in it, and we'll look at all the different components of that piece and how they were manipulated, and hopefully in the course of that you'll gain an actionable and usable beginning into how to use the software. So begin by launching GarageBand. And if you've got an existing project, it'll open it up. I'm going to close this. This is a screen that you're likely to get, an empty project. You can simply say choose. It will ask you what kind of track you want to make. It's going to want you to start with something. Choose an audio track. Choose this type of track and make it a stereo track and hit create. It'll bring up this layout. These buttons here will enable you to sort of toggle what you see, so you can hide the library and you can hide the track examiner. Over here, you're going to find your loop browser, which is important to us. Here, you can create new tracks with the same type of setting. There are two kinds of tracks. There are audio tracks that hold audio data, and there are also instrument tracks. So, for example, if we go to new track and we choose a software instrument, we can say create, and then we can decide what kind of instrument we want that to be. Here in the media browser, we could say we want it to be a Steinway grand piano, and then that track would be an instrument track. But mostly what I'm going to focus on today is using the existing material that's available to you here in the loop browser. And so with this sort of cursory look at how to initiate a project, I'm going to take you through how I created the piece of music that I posted yesterday. Just open the project up. So I began this song very intuitively. I more or less composed it from top to bottom. And I started with this layer here. Now, I pulled this from the loop browser, and if we look for it, you'll see you can search it, loop browser, and if we expand this out, we can see the exact name of this, Jazzy Drum Set 12. By clicking on it, you can preview it. Now, I happen to know that when you set an extreme tempo in a project, it can bring out some interesting artifacts in the loops. So for example, if this project were set, here is where you can sort of choose the time signature of the project and the speed of the project. But let's say if this project were set at 120 BPM, this is what this would sound like. I chose 20, which is a fairly extreme tempo for this audio sample. There are two kinds of content in this browser. There are loops, which are pieces of audio that can be time stretched. And as you manipulate the tempo of the project here, there will be this process of time stretching the sample, as you just heard, that same sample at 2 speeds. An important thing to know is that while these icons that are in blue are audio content, these icons in green are loops, but they're made up of MIDI data that play instruments. And the difference between the two is these are recordings, while these are MIDI sequences of notes that play through an instrument. And the main difference is between these two, when you get into the world of working in extreme tempos to excavate the aesthetic properties within a loop, is that when you time stretch an audio loop by some sort of extreme degree, in this case playing it from 120 to 20, 80% slower than perhaps it was intended to be played, different kinds of artifacts will manifest in that audio loop. Whereas in the case of a MIDI instrument, the playback will sound perfectly clean because all you're doing is you're just playing a sequence of notes at a slower rate through a software sampler. And the samples in that sampler are not themselves time stretched. You're just playing those samples more slowly. So I made a distinction in the project between audio samples and MIDI instruments. I wanted some things to be affected by the extreme tempo, and I wanted other things to not be affected by the tempo. So I started with this rhythmic groove. Just to look at these controls here, you're going to see this is obviously the volume. This is the left, right, and pan for the track. This is a mute button. This is a solo button. When you press it, all the other tracks will be muted except those which you've soloed. Or you can mute individual tracks. They're just, one is simply the obverse of the other. So if we listen to this track soloed, you'll hear the effect of the tempo stretch on it. And I wanted that because I wanted to bring a sense of unreality to the track. You can see I'm increasing the volume. Now that splash seemed to me to be a good beginning for the piece, so that's sort of how I arrived at that. Up here you've got a chance to switch between automation and just looking at the content. And then in automation, you choose what aspect of automation you'd like to look at. So there are a number of things that you can automate. You can automate every parameter of the plugins, the volume, the pan, etc., that are associated with the track. You can see those here. The next thing that I decided that I wanted in this piece was some kind of melodic content. And I was just working associatively, and I chose this. Now, if you click the track, some parameters down below, and you can take a look at how this guitar is created. This 12-string acoustic guitar was chosen from the loop browser over here and dragged into the project, and it created this track for me. With all of these parameters already designed, I'm going to turn them off so you can hear what they are doing. Now the compressor is just going to cap the maximum volume level of the track. This chorus is going to detune the guitar slightly and mix that detuned channel in with the primary audio. And I think the EQ on the track is flat. If you choose this middle parameters section, you can see how the different aspects of the plugin are being applied. And there's a little bit of echo to the track and a little bit of reverb. You can hear that little falling away echo happening. If you want to center the flow of the piece so that your work area always remains directly in front of you, engage this, and it'll move the play bar into the center. So those two things together then sounded like this. And then I wanted a bass. And I wanted the bass because when you build a composition, you want the full frequency range to have content. So laying musical content down in the low register, the frequency range with the bass, it not only grounds the tonality of the piece, but it just stretches the ear to fill the whole frequency range of your ability, of your hearing. So now we have a groove, we've got a guitar, we've got a bass, and I added to this ballad piano, which to me kind of connoted what I would call normalcy, or something that was genre specific. And I think inwardly I thought that this could create tension for the piece because its optimistic simplicity is something that I could work to subvert in other layers of the composition. Let's hear it faster. You can see what that sounds like. So to me, that has this sort of inspirational quality. Let's go back, and let's listen to that all together. Now this is the totality of the groove right here. Though this bass is of a longer phrase, effectively the whole loop is taking place in the course of two measures, which are of course being played very, very slowly. After that, I went hunting in something that was kind of in the borderline between music and a sound effect, and that produced this. There's some tonality to it. It really sounds like bird call, I think. And you can see down here about how I worked with it. If I turn off my processing, first I added delay, which created this sort of echo effect on it, and then I placed it in a space. Here it is without any of those things applied. Now let's add those things back in. That's adding this delay. And then you look up here, there are a whole range of things. I chose something from here, complex and pitch shifted, but you can try lots of different patterns until you find something that's interesting to you. And then I put it in a space. Let's hear them together. Neither of these two things are actually engaged. They're defaults. They come with every channel you create will have this compressor and EQ available as a sort of a preset. So if we hear all of these together, here's what we'll hear. Now, to me, this is already kind of going to the borderland between sound design and music. And I think one of the things that has affected the way I work as a composer is that I tend to hear sound as an extension of music and vice versa. After this, I added this melodic component, which I grabbed just intuitively and for no particular reason. I felt like the piece needed a voice. So I chose this. And I added the space. Now, it's important to remember that this is being affected by the tempo. So if we play this, but at the slower tempo, it has that the super reality of that extended breath. At this point, for some reason, I know the next thing that I added was this laughter, audience laughter. And so let's listen to that. I didn't change it in any way. Here, I'll drag this here to put it in the order that it was created. And I don't know what motivated me to do that, but I think up to this point, what I'm thinking is that I'm balancing this space between plausible music and things that undermine it and that suggest a deeper metaphoric reality. So I think the sitcom laughter for me was about plausible social response. And this is what all of this sounds like together. So at this point, I'm really exploring in a very open way what's going on. I'm not really consciously asking myself any big questions at this point. I'm just following my impulse to create. So the next thing that I added was later in the piece, I had this feeling that it might be nice to hear a car drive through. So I added that, and if we hear that with you hear that little bit of laughter. Now the car was not really coming out in the mix very well, so I added a distortion plugin to it. Distortion, and of course to add plugins, you click in the empty area here, and then it brings up everything that you can choose. You'll have your recent things you've chosen here, and then here you'll have all the other things that are available to you. Distortion can be a nice way of pulling something through a mix because it tends to exaggerate the high frequency content. So here's the car effect without the distortion. And here's the car effect with the distortion. You hear that tighter bite to the tires as they go by. Just through my experience, that's one of the ways that I use distortion, which is to just exaggerate high frequency content. I think this next idea to pull in this peaking opera sound, which of course is stretched far beyond plausibility, had something to do with the virus, not in any pejorative sense, but just this whole thing that's going around in the early days of the coronavirus with the focus on China. I think that's literally all I was doing was pulling something. I think that's where my association came from. And again, this is stretched. And I added a reverb to that so you can hear this. I just tried different reverbs. They're here in reverb, and there are 4 that are built into the software. And I think you can just try them by sound. Space Designer is something called an impulse response reverb, and it's meant to simulate realistic spaces. The other reverbs are synthetic reverbs and spaces, plates and things like this, and they just all have a different sound. The others, Space Designer is more CPU intensive, and it focuses more on realism. These others are more production, music, sound reverbs. I then went and grabbed another piece of opera. I actually just made a copy of this track. Let me see if right-clicking. I am using a mouse, so I right-clicked this and chose new track with duplicate settings. So it copied that reverb into the track, and I went and found another piece of peaking opera, and it sounds like this. Again, it's stretched very significantly. At this point, for some reason, I just had this idea of a telephone ring, and I don't know why. I just heard a telephone ring, and I think that had to do with me with both a sense of alarm and also communication. And I put it in a space. I felt a need to hear a voice of some kind, and I don't know why, but I went over here and I screened this by vocals, and I just started playing different melodies. What I did was I went ahead and allowed what I had already created to play. And then I just tried things over. Nope. So maybe if we want to know what that sounds like under more normal circumstances, but anyway, I ended up choosing this lyric here. To kind of toggle all, I press the Option key when I click, and it'll just solo that one. So if you got a bunch of things soloed and you just Option click the one, it'll turn off all the other solos and just turn on that one. But here's what the Jax lyric sounds like.
If any woman comes around trying to test me.
And I didn't add any plugins to it or anything like that. Now, if you click and hold over here and drag up, it will let you solo. So I just clicked and held the mouse and dragged straight up. So let's hear it together.
If any woman comes around trying to test me. Feel the rhythm on the bass,
Now, in the recording that I posted yesterday, I had an exact copy of this in this position, but I wasn't happy with it this morning when I woke up, so I made a replacement. Now, what's interesting is that if you click here where you see this up and down arrow, it will show you other options within that loop set, and you can make a swap. So this morning I swapped out 8 for 6, and I thought it felt a little bit better because somehow not only was it different, but it brought some closure. I'm also interested in the fact that this lyric invites you to listen to it and to understand it, but at this tempo, it is not possible to understand what he's saying, or it's only barely possible to understand what he's saying. At that point, and I'll go ahead and drag this up here, I felt that something should fill in between. So I'm going to Option click this to turn off the other solos, and we'll listen to just these two and how they relate to each other.
If any woman comes around trying to test me. La, 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 la. La, la, la.
I added a reverb to this. Now, the reason I chose this vocal is because earlier in the week I was thinking about John Lennon, and in the current context of the tragedy that we're going through, I thought about his murder, and so for some reason I thought about the Beatles, and subconsciously this was just functioning in me, and so I added it to the piece, and then I wanted to hear another vocal, something else to extend this, and so I added this. So I think at this point, I felt that I had sort of an introduction, I had sort of what I would call an introduction establishing the groove. I didn't want to establish that groove and then bring in the lyrics. I actually just wanted to get going and to add the complication almost immediately. Since this all seemed very plausible and understandable to me, I didn't feel like there was any need to wait. Then we have the addition of all of this metaphoric complexity in here, which is quite dense. Then I decided to kind of clear this out and give the focus over to this peaking opera component. And I don't know exactly where the idea of the dog barking came in, but I think for me it had something to do with the virus or something to do with an uncontrolled sort of animal component. There was just sort of a feeling that it was this kind of obvious kind of sound icon for menace. So I just sort of allowed, and it's also rhythmic, so I kind of allowed that to. I just found a place to put it in, and I thought its rhythm was interesting. So I added an echo to it. And in part, it was because I really wanted this thing to extend beyond just the soundbite. I wanted it to kind of die off into here. And partly how I ended up doing it was I automated this echo to come to turn on just towards the end so that this last bark would sort of echo off into the piece at the end. I didn't want the bark to just go out abruptly, but I sort of found that over the course of time. Then the last thing that I added were these knocks, which came in when I decided to return to the original content of the piece, which is say I returned to this beginning. So we have this kind of establishment of the groove, this beginning. We have something that you would call a sort of development section of the piece here, and then a kind of return to the beginning, with the difference that I've added this door knocking, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. And I think the door knocking had to do with in my mind, with the coming of unknown things, I think is how I would describe it. And I put a particularly long reverb on it. A large room size, the parameter goes up to 100. I chose a lot of reverb signal and much less dry, so it would be saturated. If you reverse these, you can hear how they work. So dry is just the original sound itself. And then reverb. If I took all the dry out, it felt ungrounded to me, so I just wanted some of the dry signal to stay in there to bring it sharpness. So this reverb plugin is blending in a little bit of the untouched signal, and then it's blending in the effect, and that's the amount that I added. It turned out that I then decided to pare all the layers away at the end, leaving only this sort of whistle sound. I eliminated the string dream because I thought that we wanted to kind of pull away the plausibility of it. I left in the bass because I felt it was important to the rhythm, and we just left exposed these knocks. And I think what I was thinking was that this sort of dream space that we had gone through left open or ahead of us, this idea of things that are to come, and a question about what would happen next. So I've sent you the piece in full. I don't think it'll play particularly well through this recording, but this does give you a kind of a sense for how it was made. One of the ways you can kind of keep track of what you've done is this idea of the arrangement bar, where you can add, by clicking this, you can create these little labels, and then you can drag them into place, and you can size them, and it just helps you to identify the different parts or components of your song. There are some kind of standard tags in here, but you can also give these sections custom names. So when you add these, it'll create this little, it'll create a tag for you. Then you can size that tag to however big you want it to be. You can give it a name, and then you drag it into position. And it was just one of the ways that I was able to kind of create this kind of broader sense of looking at the piece sectionally. So I was able to identify, well, this is the intro. These are kind of the development where we move from the peaking opera is sort of hinted at here, but it's mostly these vocals that are dominating. We peel these away, there's exposes this opera component, and then we return to these vocals again with this sort of knocking thing. So I just wanted to kind of lay those sections out up here. So that is a tour of the piece, and with significant things to note about it. The core decision here really being the decision to apply a very extremely slow tempo, and then to have that tempo play the sample material at such slow speeds that in the same way in which a photograph, when you zoom in on it, you see a lot of high resolution detail inside the image. By slowing down the tempo, you do the same thing. You expose lots of tiny details in the sound that otherwise would be invisible to your ear or would pass through your ear subconsciously. And by slowing the tempo down, you make those subconscious details conscious, and then you're able to work with them compositionally. And so that is how this piece was created. I'm going to post today's sort of version of that to you, along with the link to this video on YouTube. And I look forward to connecting with you guys next week. Thanks for watching.